Hello, friends. This is the week in our course when we complete our discussion of the New Abolition and then move into the second chapter of the book on breaking white supremacy. So we have two major figures at the heart of our discussion this week, Richard Wright Jr. and Mordecai Johnson. And of course, we also have that discussion of the theology of the cross and the Black church tradition at the end of the New Abolition. Richard Wright Jr. Was a bishop in the AME Church, a storied figure, though there's not much you can learn about him in the usual sort of literature about the AME Church, or that you couldn't occasionally sort of dig out of the literature on Du Bois. So I was pretty far into this project before I realized just the extraordinary breadth as well as depth of the work and career of Richard Wright Jr. And then, of course, there was a surprise as well at the end, even of that. His has a remarkable background to begin with, just being the child of two Deep South academics, both of them Greek professors. His father gets 2 or 3 pages in encyclopedias of Black American history. And so Richard Wright Jr. is someone who was raised to go to Harvard or Yale. And it ended up being the University of Chicago Divinity School, where he's shown as a student, and that helped to get him to Germany, where he had the experience of having the veil fall off that a couple of you wrote about in your Moodle discussions this week. This is someone who, being so well trained and also just being brilliant, things come to him easily, and then he doesn't hold it over people. He just sort of effortlessly is making what he is good at of service to others. So his whole life is this life of service, of asking himself, how can I be of service to my community, to my church, the academy, to those around him, to his family. He ends up, his whole family ends up gathering around him in Philadelphia, including later on, even his father. Yes, Wright is someone who writes a tremendous book early in his career. That's a kind of sequel to or analogous to the Du Bois book on Black Americans in Philadelphia. Wright expands the frame to Pennsylvania, following Du Bois at Penn, and writes a book that in many ways is even better than the Du Bois book, because Wright pays such careful attention to the problem of talking about Black criminality in big cities in a way that is not going to reinforce harm, the way that he does believe that Du Bois is guilty of, even as he praises Du Bois to the skies and always thinks of himself as a follower of Du Bois. So writing that book would have opened up an academic career to him, except, of course, he ends up taking over the paper of the AME Church, and then the book and the publishing house itself saves them both. Ends up later on having to save them again. Gets into the real estate business because of the Great Migration. He thinks, instead of just giving sermons about this or trying to get the AME Church to be more hospitable to people, I could just go directly into this work, actually learn the business, buy a bunch of houses, and then directly be of service to people who are coming. So this is someone just that sort of direct, sort of practical way of living the social gospel. And then, of course, later on does something similar even in the banking industry, as his father moves to Philadelphia. And then they go into the banking business together, and then combines that with being a bishop for years. So just remarkable career. And I was pretty far into it. I had read a great many microfilmed articles of his in the paper and read all of his books and read a great deal about his context, and seeing him in his context and thinking I've got a pretty good handle on Richard Wright Jr. when I came across this section just near the very end of his memoir, where he talks about taking a white pill. And I was just absolutely floored. I didn't know what to do with this. It just stunned me in a way that first I just had to even gather myself together and think, did I miss something? Was this always there and I just didn't see it? And thinking about it, realizing, no, this is Wright saying to you this, that even he, as together, as amiable, as, always the guy in charge, is the wonderful leader whom you never have to worry about. Even he has been so harmed by the racist culture that he is in that it has tortured him, and it's made him sick. It's made him sick to the point that he's finally going to reveal something at the end about just how bad it was. And the only thing that's in his entire life work, all these other books he wrote and his articles for the AME audience and wider audiences, the only thing that's in there is this. Occasionally he'll sprinkle this point. He'll say, it's a terrible thing to be poor. Being poor is just miserable. And when you're really poor, it almost doesn't matter which side of the color line you're on, because just being poor is so miserable, you have no choices. And at that point, at that level, the color line doesn't matter so much. Where it matters more and more as you go up the social scale, because racism inflicts more harm on the higher achievers than it inflicts on anyone else. And so, in the end, before I then, wrote this section, I thought, well, there was an indication, there was something there that can explicate from one to the other how you could actually get to that business about a white pill at the end. But still, it is a stunning way to end the meaning of his life story. And then we flip in the next book to talking about Mordecai Johnson. And here now we have another figure who's had a very forbidding father, and a father who just felt like he was 10 feet tall, in this case, to Johnson. But of course, this father was brutalized in slavery. And it stunted his physical growth. And he is accustomed to just very hard work. And he himself is just a very hard figure. Johnson's favorite word for his father is severe. And he says, I was a grown man before I could have a conversation with him. And by then he's starting to count that, there are some advantages to having had such a hard father. But of course, he became Mordecai Johnson by virtue of also having this mother who doted on him and poured out her love for him and filled him with her dreams. And so he became a highly extroverted, ebullient, self-confident type who preached about mother love for the rest of his life. And I think in this case, it really is the case. Mordecai Johnson, even though growing up in the Deep South, even though he went through a lot of the same things, he really is. There's no contrary evidence on this point. He really is someone who is as strapping and ebullient and extroverted as he seems. He does not let them get to him. But that enables him to play this public role that he has. Johnson is a figure of just enormous inspiration later on to Benjamin Mays and young Howard Thurman, and later to Martin Luther King Jr. and so many others, because to them it was just this realized impossibility. Here's this guy who speaks to these vast crowds without a note in front of him, and with just this ease, this self-confidence that it doesn't bother him at all if he's speaking to a commencement assembly at Harvard, or the upper class of the Pittsburgh, or the YMCA. and a much more, humble folk at a retreat. He's the same everywhere, and with a quintessential progressive Black social gospel theology. I mean, Mordecai Johnson was everything that the progressive Black social gospel was, and vice versa. Yes, he had this embattled career at Howard University because he's teaching people who very much resent that their boss is a Baptist preacher. They just feel that that's just demeaning to them. And moreover, he is a highly self-confident type as well. So he's telling them about, what they should write, next, and how good their last book was. And judging them, standing in some judgment over them. Plus, he's left wing, and a lot of them just hate him for that. That they feel threatened by his left wing politics. So there's so much against him in that context. And to Johnson, this is on the way to the cross. He was called to be the first Black president of Howard University. And so for all of his strapping ebullience, being someone who can carry on at a 90-minute clip without, pausing for a breath, he never really talks about this in public. He just suffers it and says, it will come out in the end. And indeed, he is one of the great university presidents of the whole 20th century, even though there's very little literature about him. So my last 3 videos have not made it, and I'm going to cut it off right there, just hoping that I've now got something I can keep, friends. So take care. I miss you, and I look forward to talking about Mays and Thurman next week. So long, friends.